to Crypto Clothesline. We're glad to be here with you. Hanging out the crypto laundry. Getting all the crypto info for you. Crypto Clothesline. Crypto Clothesline.
Hello, Amy Rose.
Hi, are you having an okay day?
It's just great. Did you want the honest answer now, or should I stop tearing my hair out while we're speaking?
Give me the honest answer. Go.
Yeah, no, I'm good. Look, if I started listing everything, I'd bore myself and all our listeners, and I'd bore you. So it's just moving right along.
Well, our interview today is pretty awesome.
Gosh.
We spoke to Aleks Svetski, who we do need to put in place right now. This episode needs a language warning. We did tell him that we were going to remove the bombs with a beep, and also, because of our sometimes SH words, I think it's absolutely fine. And it emphasizes the point. And I don't know if you've seen that video on YouTube about why the F word is so important. It's because it emphasizes certain words when we use it in a sentence. So if you say simply, it's hot, it's not going to have as much impact if we don't put F. It's so F-ing hot, and people go, what? Yeah. Yeah.
We can let rip now. We'll blame Aleks.
And then, we'll blame Aleks. So, I'm actually, I'm fine with it.
So kind of the function of swear words then, it's a bit like bold, like instead of using italics, which might be OMG, that could be the italic version. But if you use the F word, then it's kind of like putting things in bold, capitals, at number 16 font. Is that what you're saying?
I think yes, absolutely. And I think that's a great analogy.
I love that.
That's a great effing analogy.
Just go for it. Just say it.
So one of the things that that Aleks didn't get to say, which was unfortunate, he didn't get to say what his favorite quote was. And he sent it in an email after with all his contact details. So this is Aleks Svetski from Amber, in case anyone's wondering who we're interviewing today. But one of his favorite quotes is from one of his articles, which had a lot of traction on Hacker Noon, a lot of claps. But the opening quote of this article said that the quote is, "Kindly let me help you or you will drown," said the monkey putting the fish safely up a tree. Basically, it means every disaster comes from good intentions, and that's from Alan Watts. I have an example of E.T.
I think we could just talk about the road to hell is paved with good intentions and talk about our childhoods and also our journey as mothers.
That's so true. That's like almost the exact same quote, isn't it?
It's exactly the same, yeah.
I was thinking when I read it today, something weird happened a couple of days ago when I was stopped on the road in a traffic jam, and I was watching a man and a car who didn't quite know who should let each other go first. So a guy was crossing over a driveway and a car was waiting for this guy to cross over. He didn't know if he should go first or the guy was going to wait. You know when you're coming towards someone and you're like, you're going to hit each other and then you stop because neither of you knows which person is going to move out of the way first, and then you just stand in front of each other bobbing heads. Like,
and then you then you start to say something under your breath like, no, you go, and there's this little movement, isn't there, of the hand like, no, you go. And every now and then you get a really strongly gesticulating Italian, like my partner who'll go, "Ma vaffanculo va," just really clearly shows with a very strong hand movement, like, "I'm waiting for you, just cross."
Yeah, so there's two people who are trying to do the right thing, and this is the disaster. What I saw, it wasn't terrible. The guy he put one foot in front of the car, and the car accelerated a bit. So the guy, and I shouldn't be laughing, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I was like, okay, now I'm going to install that dash cam that I got for Christmas 2 years ago, because this would have went viral. And I was like, he just rolled onto the bonnet of this. He did. Yeah, because well, where else was he supposed to go? He didn't fall down because he was walking and he just sort of just imagine that you sort of get nudged by a car and you fall onto the bonnet of the car.
I didn't actually think it had gone to that extent. I mean, I thought maybe, he took a step and the car stopped and then he stopped. And
No. He didn't get hurt. But he quickly walked, like he was fine. It was just a little bit of a nudge. But the guy who was driving was really confused about what had happened. And then the guy who had been nudged was also like, they were looking at each other like, what just happened?
Oh, God.
But it's because the guy who was driving should have wound down his window if he was going to accelerate. That, like, dude, like, we've been standing here bobbling heads for ages now. Should I cross or should I go down?
It's coming to an agreement. Oh my gosh. That's what happened when you get two nice people on the road. You see, it's dangerous. We should all drive like Milanese drivers, We should all drive like Italians and just completely take over and be arrogant and hog the lanes and have no issues with triple parking because, everyone just understands it's like survival of the fittest and the fastest.
At least we know where everyone stands.
And they are standing, not rolling over bonnets.
I feel so bad, but he didn't get hurt. It was weird. The whole thing was
that really would have been webcam material. I mean, you couldn't have done it better in a Monty Python film if you'd tried.
Oh my God. So I really liked that quote, and it was quite poetic considering I was thinking of it.
There are actually quite a few quotes like that in the homeschool community. There's a meme that's going around. It's been going around for years, and it's something like just a black and white cartoon of an elephant being pushed up a tree by a monkey or something similar, kind of along the same lines. It's like, trying to get all kids to adhere to one learning style and learn one piece of information is kind of the equivalent of sticking an elephant up the tree and saying, now you're in your natural environment. Like, a tree is a place for a bird, not necessarily an elephant.
So I guess this is the moment where we tell everybody what we're doing.
Oh, yeah. But before we do that, can I just say that I really liked this one takeaway. Well, there was quite a few takeaways, but I really liked what Aleks called, and he was referring to Jeff Bezos, but we ended up putting it into an article that we're writing for the, where to shop with crypto business. And the regret minimalization concept. I love that because we're about to go to Perth Airport, right? And work with terminals. People. And I've been trying to find the words to say, like, just don't miss out. Don't be an idiot that was saying the internet will never work because you'll just be a fool. And it was such a cute, compact terminology, regret minimalization.
I loved it too. I do regret minimalization when I bribe my kids in the shopping centre with some sort of sugary treat if they stop screaming.
So it's like weighing up the risks, really, isn't it? Like, am I going to be sorry about giving sugar, or am I going to be okay about having some sanity and getting us all home safely and not having a car accident on the way?
Yeah.
Totally relate. Yes, so what do we do? All right, well, do you want to start?
Okay. Welcome to the Crypto Clothesline. Our show is about helping women join the blockchain wealth revolution for themselves and for their families.
Our names are amy-rosegoodey and Daviti Catherine Pass, and we're speakers in blockchain and crypto, and we're on this mission.
We're learning together with you, talking with leading experts in the space, exploring cutting-edge technology projects that are shaping the future for our children.
This podcast is for intelligence and growth, and our values are for peace, harmony, and collaboration on the planet. Bonnet roll free.
Let's hope so. Let's hope that's the only time we ever have to think about that again.
Yeah. Well, let's have a listen to Alex's conversation to our interview.
Yeah, let's do it. Welcome to the show, Aleks Svetski. Is that how we say it?
That's good enough.
Okay, I'm sorry if I screwed that one up. I do it a lot.
I can't even say it myself, so it's all good.
We could have a fun game with this, couldn't we? Welcome to the show, Aleks Svetski. Thank you so much for coming on. You've taken some time away from Amber, the project you're working on at the moment, to have a chat with us. Thank you for coming on.
Welcome, Aleks, to Crypto Clothesline.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get the ball rolling by talking with you about your position of what has unfolded this week with the JP Morgan cryptocurrency, the JPM coin. And there's a few memes out already. But Aleks, your position, and from what I've heard when you speak, it's like, it's okay. The banks are going to come in and there's nothing to worry about, in that respect.
Yeah, I'll give some color to that and I'll explain the nuances there. I still maintain maintain, and I'll always maintain, that the banks have no clue what's going on, or if they do have a clue what's going on, they're very good at covering it up, or, for example, sending people on a wild goose chase thinking, that the facts are other than what they say. What I'm referring to is Bitcoin is completely different to any of these bank issued tokens, any of these stable coins. In fact, anything else that's out there on the market, every other coin, every other, copycat of Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera. It stands completely on its own. And, what one good way to describe it is this digital self-sovereign asset. What this JPM coin is not. It is a derivative or a centrally issued digital token by a bank. And that's fine. These guys are going to do that. They're going to, create, faster payments and all that sort of stuff. I know when I originally started coming up in the Brisbane ecosystem, when I was speaking out against, the Bcashers, they were rising up saying, oh, look, Bitcoin's value proposition is fast payments or instant payments and all that sort of stuff. And that was never a game we could win, because the bankers, the stable coins are always going to come up. People right now, for the purpose of spending, they're going to use PayPal, they're going to use JP Coin, they're going to use all that sort of crap well before they're going to use Bitcoin as a unit for commerce and exchange currently. What Bitcoin represents is completely different. It's this self-sovereign digital unit. When you hold it, it's unconfiscatable. No one can take it from you. No one can manipulate it. You can't inflate it. You can't change it. You can't censor it. You can't stop payments. You can't do any of that shit. And that is what makes Bitcoin unique. I did a talk the other week where I defined money, I defined the history of money, and then I defined where it sits in what I call the societal stack, which is we as human beings, we're unique because we're able to communicate about abstract concepts. And if you have communication as the base layer of everything, our ability to communicate gives us our ability to cooperate and then build society around us, and actually have ideas, concepts, buildings, cars, technology, whatever you can think of comes from this concept of communication. The layer that sits on top of it is money, and money has some core tenets, things like scarcity, attributes like fungibility, divisibility, etc. We've sort of, particularly over the last couple of 100 years, completely forgotten about, or they've been conveniently swept under the rug. So I deep dove into that stuff, and I differentiated between what I called the unit and the network. And Bitcoin is the only thing on the planet that represents the three key attributes that a unit of money needs to have in order to perform the functions of money. And those functions of money being store of value, unit of account, and means of exchange. The three key attributes of the unit in order to be able to do that is hard to produce, impossible or difficult to counterfeit, and limited in supply. And the harder the limit, the better. So you don't have those guarantees from JP Morgan. And I mean, I don't have to say this, but I mean, who the hell is going to trust JP Morgan if it hits the fan and they need to print more of the stuff? Where's your scarcity? Where's your self-sovereignty? Where's your ability to hold it? Where's your uncensorability? It doesn't exist. So, to come back to your original thing about, let the banks come, they'll do what they want to do. I couldn't give two shits about this because, number one, they can tout whatever blockchain technology they want. In fact, they can have the term blockchain technology. I don't even believe Bitcoin is a blockchain technology. I think Bitcoin is a monetary social engineering technology. It just so happens to have some sort of segmented database in it where you store the transaction inputs and outputs. So I couldn't give a shit about blockchain. The banks can take it. They can do what they want with it. They can parade it around and in the end build nothing. Whereas Bitcoin itself is doing its thing and it's winning its game as the only network that guarantees the ability to store, send, and receive a digital unit that is provably scarce and self-sovereign. And there's not really an argument.
Aleks, you recently released an article saying how to not be that guy, or don't be that guy. The guy who says that the internet's going to fail, that email won't be used to send messages instead of mail. Don't be that guy who says that we won't be separated and communicating virtually all over the world. Don't be that guy who rejects technology. Can you tell us a little bit about this article and how people are constantly rejecting Bitcoin when it's in the same league as these other technologies, and also a little bit about yourself?
Cool. Fantastic. All right, so I wrote two that week when I wrote that article. One was Don't Be That Guy, and the other one was the Bezos and Bitcoin, and what do they have in common? They were both sort of built around this concept, multiple concepts. One being the idea of asymmetric bets and things coming from the fringe that people don't sort of perceive as relevant, but that are network phenomena. The internet was one of them, electricity was another, and, I believe Bitcoin's, the latest in that sort of trend. And that was one element of it. The other element of it was this concept that Jeff Bezos popularized, which was the regret minimization framework, which, he says it himself. He goes, it's a nerdy way of saying, how do I do things in life that when I'm 80 years old in a rocking chair, I look back and I don't regret not having done it? And again, he threw the internet in that basket, and I definitely throw, Bitcoin in that basket. So they were the premise of those two articles. And before I dive deeper, maybe I'll quickly introduce myself. I don't know if your listeners are aware of me or my background or anything like that, but I've been involved in capital markets for a long time, self-taught, not in any professional capacity. I've been a lonesome trader for many, many years, since before 2008. And I haven't traded consistently throughout that time, but I've had my finger on the pulse. I got involved with Bitcoin in a significant way sort of late 2015, early 2016, much like a lot of people, particularly people that were from the whole gold silver space, which I was prior to that. I invested quite heavily into gold and silver in 2010, 11 and 12 during the run up. And that was around the first time I'd heard of Bitcoin. But back then, I definitely drunk the Kool-Aid for gold, and I didn't really look at Bitcoin seriously, to my everlasting, I guess, regret. Following my escapade in the sort of gold silver space, I went down the tech rabbit hole. I really took a roll down building software inside the machine learning space, and what we were doing, we were taking personality profiling, behavioral science, and all of that, and building an algo that would match candidates with appropriate roles. And the mission there was to sort of get rid of resumes, to get rid of job ads, and to create a method for people to do what they're naturally good at and what is in line with who they are.
So it sounds like you went from gold and silver to Bitcoin, but how did you get to the Bitcoin side of things in the first place?
I guess when I first started getting into it, as it is for everyone, you don't really realize how deep and how broad this is. And the more I've gone down the rabbit hole, the more I've realized that this is just one of those phenomena. I don't even like to call it a technology. I think it's a cheap description of Bitcoin. I like to call it a phenomena, is that it's such a blend of so many different things. It's money, it's social engineering, it's game theory, it's fault tolerance, it's proof of work, it's cryptography, it's a segmented database, which people like to call the blockchain. So it's all of these things in one, and it's this recipe that has worked, and part of what's made it work is it's organic development, it's the fact that there's no founder or an anonymous founder and all this sort of stuff. So it's such an organic mishmash of so many disparate fields, which I've had whether interests or experience in for quite a number of years. And I don't know, to loop that train of thought off, when people ask me why am I involved in this, why am I doing something else, I don't think in my entire life I've found something that piques my interest from so many different angles. And yeah, so that's sort of why I'm here. And I sort of write articles when I can. And coming back to the Don't Be That Guy dismissing Bitcoin, I'm sure you girls will put the link in the show notes, but one of the examples I used was all of these people and so-called experts throughout the years, starting from the days of electricity to the telegraph to the telephone to email to the internet to iPhones to all of these incredible networks that have transformed society. There's always been an expert or people that are at the helm of whatever industry they're in that is potentially being disrupted or changed, that have said this will never work.
Aleks, it sounds like you used to be a naysayer yourself, but what was it that converted you from that guy? Because you're a very intelligent guy and you did hear about it earlier. We all did, and we all have our regrets. But what was it that tipped you over to the other side?
I think what triggered me, and do you know what? That's actually a good question. I can't remember. I think it was around the time when Trump was coming into presidency, and there was some global turmoil happening again. etc. I think that was part of what triggered me to start looking at things like gold again. And then, I can't really pinpoint it. I think it might have been me seeing Max Kaiser interview someone or, something like that. Well, one of those guys that mentioned Bitcoin again, I was like, oh, this is still around. And then I did a little bit of reading. And then what I can attribute the person who resonated with me most was Andreas Antonopoulos, which I'm sure you and most of your listeners would be aware of. The guy's the bomb. He's a legend. And the way he explains things just resonated with me because whilst he's got much more of a networking security background and much more technical background, which I don't have to that extent, I've got a markets, monetary history and all that sort of stuff background. And when he sort of interlaces the two together, it just rang alarm bells for me in my head. And I was like, holy crap, what have I been doing? Why have I not been doing something with this? And, you go and buy some. And then as putting some skin in the game always does, it drives you to be like, holy shit, why is my money going up and down? What is this thing about? And then off you go.
So in your article, and this is what I found really interesting, you refer to the previous technologies, and although technology isn't the best word for Bitcoin, it does fall into this category, and I do agree. Can you tell us a little bit about these other technologies where people were like, it's dodgy, it's crap, even the internet itself? I've seen some really funny articles written in like the early 90s about people saying there's no way the internet is going to be able to take over newspapers, for example. So can you explain what you wrote in your article about these other technologies?
Well, the key thing is understanding that these technologies are networks, and at the most fundamental level, they're a way for us to cooperate and communicate. And whenever you have networks that enable efficient cooperation / communication, they start to proliferate. The internet was one of those examples. The email is another fantastic example. Is, when we look at email, it runs off, 2 or 3 protocols. It's POP3, IMAP, and SMTP, and they were the protocols that allowed for that communication layer to occur. And what happened? People found it far more efficient, far more practical to do that than to sit down and write a letter with a piece of paper and mail it via Australia Post or UPS or whatever you're going to mail it with, right? Likewise with the internet. The internet started off as this idea to create a robust communications network post-World War II that couldn't be blown up or couldn't be impacted by some sort of central failure, which is how the telephone and the telegraph were sort of built out. And again, when the early internet or the DARPANET and all of that sort of stuff was being developed, the intent wasn't to create some Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. It was to create a more robust communications network. But when you have a infrastructure like that where each node that comes on makes the network more valuable, you start to get this network growth that doesn't require the technology to move at the same pace as the network growth itself. And it's a little bit of a distinction to think about there. And this is why a lot of technologists who are in this space don't get what Bitcoin is and don't get why it's important and don't realize that it's effectively a communications network that is another layer on top of something like the internet. And where I'm going with this, I'll try and extrapolate without confusing everyone too much. If we look at what money is a way for us to transact value, and transacting value is a form of useful communication. That's effectively what it is. It's communicating labor, it's communicating work, or it's communicating effort. And what we've had throughout history, money, I guess you could call it a technology as well. It's a network fundamentally, but it's also a technology. It's a way for us to do that transaction of value or to communicate value. What's interesting about Bitcoin, or what's interesting about a new form of money, is that it doesn't operate the same way as technology or an app functions, which is move fast, break things, change, iterate. Money actually, and networks like the internet, communication networks like the internet, for example, they function on a different set of predicates, which is slow, steady, don't move fast, don't break things, be stable, because once you've got a level of stability or a level of certainty on something, you start to increase the user base, and then the more users that come on, the more nodes you get, and you start to get this quadratic type growth, which by the time somebody realizes that it is growing at that pace, it's already too late. Like the Paul Krugmans of the world and all of that, when, I think it was in 98, he said, this internet thing is not going to do more for the economy than the fax machine did. And, it was air swing of the century. But, typical from an economist, especially an academic economist, none of them really grasp what happens in reality. They're all theoreticians that like to work with nice, clean math and models which don't function in the real world.
So, you were speaking in your article, and you were touching on it before, talking about linear versus exponential thinking. You mentioned in your article Moore's law and Metcalfe's law, and I read through it and I already started to sort of see double. But if you were going to explain this to someone, like at a dinner party or in line when you're buying a coffee or something, how would you explain this whole exponential growth, like how Bitcoin differs from other options out there in really simple layman's terms? I'm talking about people developing trust, because we all know that because of various media manipulations, that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are easily painted in a very dark and unappealing way to the general public. So in order for that to change, how do we use simple language to explain actually what's going on?
I think, I'm going to tie in why I'm building Amber. Is the message with Amber is pretty simple. And that's why I wrote the Bezos Bitcoin and the Don't Be That Guy, which is, hey, how would you feel, Mr. Bob, if you had the chance to put, a small amount of money into this asset, let's say $500 or $1,000, something that you wouldn't notice over a period of time? How would you feel if you had the chance to do that, and 10 years from now, that $1,000 was worth $100,000 and you didn't do it? And try and give them that sort of framework. In that sense, just about everybody is willing to dip their toe in and to hold a little bit on the basis that they might get rich, or they might get something for it, or it might mean that they have less financial pressure, or it might mean that they can get that car they always wanted, or the house that they always wanted, and all of that. So I think the best way to help people understand what the hell is going on here is to position Bitcoin as basically a cheap option on the potential of a much brighter future, i.e. you should have some exposure to this asset, just like you should have exposure to, other assets, because everybody wants effectively more over the long term, whether that be more money, more love, more, friends, or whatever it is. And we need to position Bitcoin as that. What we're doing whilst we're doing that is Bitcoin's hanging around. And what got me into it, so I mentioned it before, is I'd heard about it years ago. And then the next time I heard about it, I was like, holy crap, it's still around. Maybe it's something to look at. The same thing is going to happen here. Is each couple of years, there's going to be a boom bust cycle, particularly whilst it's, the early days. And we're going to be early days for another 5, 10, 15 years. People are going to come in, they're going to bid it up, they're going to be like, this is going to change the world, and they're all going to run away, it's going to crash, it's going to go through a period of a winter. And then the next cohort of people are going to be like, hey, I heard about this thing last time. It's still around. Maybe it is somewhere that I can put some form of value, because guess what? Every other time it's gone up 5 times, 10 times, or whatever it is. And their desire to want more, or, let's call it greed, if we're going to give it a really simple explanation, their greed is going to entice them to hold some. But once they start holding some, they're going to then be enticed to do a little bit more research. And that's sort of how the cookie crumbles, as opposed to trying to educate them about this new technology, the blockchain or cryptocurrencies or this or that, and confuse the shit out of them. People don't want that. They're not interested. And the best way to teach somebody, bar none, is skin in the game.
It's interesting though, Aleks, because I fully agree with what you're saying. And I was definitely one of those enthusiasts last year with family and friends. And I know we can't make investments or, financial advice and suggest investments, but certainly to my nearest and dearest, I was like, oh, please, get some of this and get some of that. And boom, we've had a very dry 2018. So when I say last year, I meant 2017. And then boom, we've had a very dry bar, sideways moving slightly downwards, occasional growth, pretty disillusioned, 2018. So those very same family members that Amy Rose was referring to, the people you gaze at across the dinner table, they I guess that's where I'm coming from in terms of explanation. I mean, they're not dumb, and I think we need to make sure we don't dumb down the populace by thinking they're not going to understand stuff. I understand how important it is to have some skin in the game, But if people are not getting that instant gratification, I think we still need a little bit more filler in the sandwich. I think people still need to be nourished along the way. Do you agree?
There's a saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I'm sure you've heard that saying before.
Yeah.
It's almost the same here, is that it's, trying to nourish somebody or trying to make a horse drink water when they don't want to or they're not interested in doing so is futile. So if they've got some skin in the game, they're more inclined to want to know more. And then that, at least you've got an opening there. If they don't even want to get skin in the game, I wouldn't even bother, because there'll come a point where they will. And I think the best message to them is the classic, do you want to miss out? Is the regret minimization message. Is, do you want to miss out, or do you want to put something aside on the hope that, hey, I'm not giving you advice, I'm not telling you any of this shit, I'm just literally saying, would it be a wise idea for you to allocate some of your capital to something that could be worth 100 or 1,000 times more over the next 10, 15 years? Do you think that's a good idea? If somebody says, no, that's a dumb idea, then something like this asset class is definitely not for them. And there'll be the people that did the same thing as buying Amazon at $2,000 who said that it was a dumb idea to buy it at $8. Exactly the same thing. So I just feel like, it's a tough one. And, when I get the same thing, I've been basically force feeding Bitcoin to my family for the last couple of years. Most of the time they haven't been listening. This Christmas was, fuck that. How's that Bitcoin thing working out for you? And I've just been on message, the same thing over and over again. I just, look, I told you to buy it. Shut up and buy it. You were interested in buying it when it was 15. Why are you not interested in buying it when it's $3,000? It's cheaper now. You go buy shit at a discount when you go to the supermarket. When you see your, favorite coconut milk discounted from $3.49 down to $2.49, what do? Do you say, oh, f*** that, I'm not going to buy it? You go and buy it. So I don't know. I've ended up with a slightly lower tolerance.
I thought you were going to say popularity.
One other question around this situation. What I hear is, because I've got a lot of people around me who invest in gold and silver and stocks and property and all this stuff, the normal stuff. And they come back to me and they say, look, when money actually dies, I might consider the BS that you're throwing down my throat or whatever, because they don't want to swap what they have for something that they don't understand or believe in because they're lazy or busy or whatever. Do you think, and I think this is something you've ruffled people's feathers, and you ruffled mine a bit at the Block Conscious Summit, but what's the future of the banks? I mean, will they actually fail? Because at that point I can see mass adoption like escalating, so what's your thoughts on the banks crashing and the end of the banks?
I don't think the banks are going anywhere. I think the problem with banks is banks serve a very important purpose in the world traditionally, which is a place to store money, a place to borrow, a place to, have some sort of savings, earn some interest on the stuff that you're storing with them so that they can lend some of it out. So banks perform a very specific function in the world, liquidity and all of this sort of stuff. The problem that we have is that we have zero insight or zero transparency into what's going on in terms of the products that they put together, which entail practical risk that the theoreticians that put the products together don't understand. And then you end up getting black swan events like, 2008 and all that sort of stuff. So what Bitcoin, I believe, will potentially do is, I don't believe Bitcoin is a currency. I believe it's a settlement network at the core level. If you look at, the banking infrastructure around the world, you've got central banks that settle between each other. They use, whether it's SWIFT or whatever other settlement network that they use in order to make sure that their balances are accurate and all this sort of stuff. But again, nobody has transparency, visibility into any of that stuff. You look at all what's happening with America and China at the moment. One of the big problems everyone has with China is all the data that's coming out there. Nobody knows if it's real. Nobody knows if it's bullshit. Nobody knows if someone made it up or any of that sort of stuff. So I don't believe banks are going away. I believe we'll see a new age of digitally native, for the word banks, that have reserves that are either fully or partially denominated in Bitcoin, or something that is as hard whilst being digital as Bitcoin.
It does differ from a lot of people in the cryptocurrency space. There's actually a big camp of people who are like, we hate the banks, screw the banks. So your position is quite refreshing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been in that position for a long time, and by no means am I sitting here saying I like the banks, because I believe bankers in general, a lot of them are just rent seekers. They don't actually produce any value. They don't do anything for society. They just sit there and they leech.
So you're already facilitating like a great way to implement or to gain further traction in the space with Amber. So can you explain to our listeners what Amber is? Because it's a really cool idea. And can you also explain how it differs from, there's a couple of other platforms that are a bit similar. And when I saw you present on Amber previously, I know exactly how it differs, but can you explain what it is and how it differs from other platforms?
That actually follows on really nicely from the conversation about who's going to be the next cohort that gets involved in this, which is the early majority. So I think we've sort of gone through this early adopter phase now. Now we need to build technology that helps early majority or the early majority cohort to get exposure to this. So it starts off with, I have this crusade, which is I believe everybody should hold some Bitcoin. Simple as that, bar none. Whether you're an extremist like you guys and myself, which is, Bitcoin's going to change the world, blah, 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 or whether you're on the other side where you don't really give a shit about changing the world and all of that sort of stuff, but you are a human being and you have self-interest, i.e. you want potentially more money in the future so you can do more things.
A Lambo. I want a Lambo.
Exactly. Wherever you are on the spectrum.
The autism spectrum for Lamborghinis.
Wherever you are on that spectrum, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Buying some Bitcoin makes some sense.
Totally.
Simple as that. So then the next thing is the best format to hold or to acquire or to get exposure to a nascent volatile asset class is dollar cost averaging. Simple as that. Human beings are naturally, and sorry about my swearing, but
we're gonna put some really cool bleeps over the top.
Okay, please do. So we do things backwards. When we buy stuff when we're euphoric, and we sell stuff when we're down in the dumps. And that is the complete opposite of what you should do in a market, because you are euphoric when things are really, really high in price, and you are down in the dumps when things are really, really low in price, which is why 99% of people lose money. I don't give a crap what anybody says. You actually have 100% probability over time to lose all of your money if you are a trader. Simple as that, because there is a time-based probability. Now, I don't want to get into all of that sort of stuff. So coming back to number 2 then, the best format of getting exposure to this type of asset is dollar cost averaging. So they're the sort of the 2 overarching themes. Then the next theme is, if everyone should hold Bitcoin and if dollar cost averaging is the best way, what's the best way? What's a unique or simple way we can dollar cost average? Hey, guess what? Spare change. So we can round up the spare change from all your daily transactions. People intuitively understand how a piggy bank works, money that you don't notice. So let's build a digital piggy bank for Bitcoin, so that every time you go and buy a coffee, we round up the transactions to the nearest dollar. So let's say you bought a coffee for $3.50, we'll round it up to $4, we'll take the 50 cents, we'll convert it to Bitcoin, and we'll throw it in your Amber wallet. Simple, easy, absolute no-brainer. This is really as no-brainer as it comes to when it gets to Amber, is for the average person, if they used, their normal daily transaction card and they were rounding up all of their transactions throughout the year, the average person will save about $800. You take that out over 5 years, that's $4,000. You've got a situation now where the average person will either, in 10 or 15 years' time, have that $4,000 be worth nothing if the entire Bitcoin and blockchain experiment falls apart, and they wouldn't have noticed. Or alternatively, they will have $4,000 that, again, they didn't notice, that is worth $400,000, $800,000, $1 million, and they didn't even notice the goddamn money that went into it. So it is one of the most asymmetric bets on the face of the planet.
And is it just Bitcoin that you can buy?
Primarily Bitcoin, yeah, okay. That's it. So I'm going to stick with Bitcoin for a while, because again, it comes back to the last thing we want to do is confuse the shit out of them, number one. And also, as you probably know from, my background and all that sort of stuff, I actually think that in the next 10 years, the only one that'll be around is Bitcoin. There will probably be other stuff around, but a lot of the stuff that's around today will be gone in the dustbin.
And Aleks, what will Amber do as a corporation or as an entity with people's buying information, with all that data?
When you say they're buying information?
Well, say, for example, I've got this connected to my bank, where I'm spending my money, what I do, how often I'm getting coffee from, this cafe, do I fill up on a Sunday or do I get my petrol on a Monday? So, that sort of information, that big data collection is something potentially that Amber could have access to. Is that something that you will have access to? And if so, how will you handle that data?
We do have access to it. And at the moment, we have zero analytics. I couldn't care less about what you're doing with yourself. All I care about is swapping your spare change for Bitcoin.
But people will be sensitive, I'm sure, especially after the plunderous experiences with Facebook and some of those big data handlers. How will you guarantee to people that information is not going to be sort of used at some level? Or, I believe you, and obviously you're making very clear declarations, but how is Amber going to handle that? Assuming that this app, and I hope it really does, takes off and becomes used by mainstream, which would be an awesome way of affecting mass adoption, I think. But how will you handle that question?
Right now, we don't actually store any of that transactional data. So we don't I don't even have a place to look at it internally. So we view a snapshot at the end of the day of the transactions. We work out the roundups and we allocate the roundups, and then we forget about that. We don't have a view of any of that sort of stuff.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Aleks. It's been such a pleasure. We've heard you speak in the public arena, and I know Amy Rose has had more contact with you and connection with you, both being on the East Coast. But it's been an absolute pleasure to listen to your unfolding, the way that you're unfolding concepts and some very sort of fresh ideas and different takes on how things look, and actually quite positive in the overall picture. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, I've got to say I enjoyed listening to Aleks speak in this sort of more one-on-one or between three people, conversation, this three-way conversation, as opposed to, when I've heard him speaking on other occasions. I think a lot of the messaging was lost to me personally. So I thought it was really good. I liked the fact that he had a background in so many different kinds of disciplines.
And I think that was reflected quite well. It goes from trading to psychology, I think it was, then into crypto and gold and silver. He's quite well versed in a lot of areas.
There was a question I wanted to ask him, but we just went on so many tangents and they sort of went so quickly. But I'm interested to know, and maybe Aleks, you can comment on this on Twitter or wherever you hear this, about gold and silver, because, that whole notion of diversifying your assets and making sure that you've got your eggs in more than one basket, so to speak. I'm still interested to know whether current day crypto enthusiasts are still holding gold and silver. Not that that's the sort of information you're necessarily going to be sharing.
One of the most well-known original money guys, Mike Maloney, he did a really good doco on the history of money and also a nice doco on crypto, and he's still very much into gold and silver, and he's very, very brilliant man.
I love him.
Isn't it good to diversify anyway?
Oh, I think so. I think it's really important to diversify. He's actually one of the key, with the whole homeschooling gig, we're doing a whole section on money and crypto. So I thought, by the way, that could be a really good skeleton for crypto and kids, or kids and crypto, this work we've been having as an evolutionary process. But anyway, back to this, the history of money. And I'm really interested to see what he's got to say about cryptocurrency, because I actually haven't heard that one yet.
I think I know what this calls for. Let's have a little listen to Mike Maloney talking about gold and silver and cryptocurrency in the same conversation.
I'm a precious metals guy. I see precious metals as the sure thing. They do an accounting of the expansion of the currency supply, and they're a safe haven asset. And you get into these brief periods of time where they're both a safe haven and they have the greatest potential gains in absolute purchasing power. But to ignore the most historic thing that has happened to money in 5,000 years and not reporting on it would be doing everybody a disservice. So from now on, I'm going to make a commitment, no matter how much people hate it, I'm still going to talk about cryptocurrencies once in a while. I've interviewed a lot of people in my sector, and a lot of people would badmouth cryptocurrencies, and I got the impression they were doing it because it was a threat to their own source of income, that they saw it as something that competes. They didn't want to recommend something that could threaten their specific business. And either that, or when they would say that it's a fad and it's going away or it's in a bubble, then I would know that if they weren't trying to defend their own business, then I would know that they were ignorant of the subject and they really didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, I would really like to get him on the show, actually. And next season is all about money. And how good would it be to have him on to talk about the history of money? I haven't reached out to him yet.
I have. It hasn't.
What
been
did he
pretty.
say? No way. Are you serious?
I sent an email, and kind of the only way I could get through was through the contact page. And we all know that contacts page is like a fibrous filter that you can never actually reach the person you really want to contact. And basically, I got added. I mean, it was very kind, but in a way, but I got added to their mailing list, and I just said, I actually asked if we could speak to Mike Maloney. I actually didn't request to be added to your mailing list. And bearing in mind all the kerfuffle going on in Europe, I just said it's actually not a great practice to be adding names to a list just because you acquire an email address through a query. Mm-hmm. And I got an instant reply saying that they don't do that and they're going to speak to the IT. But it was very haughty, and I unsubscribed.
Goodness me, he's going to have to come on to redeem himself.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's another discussion, isn't it? It'd be quite good to go into some gold and silver discussions because I really like talking about that stuff. But a lot of information points to silver being a lot more powerful than gold in the event of a world crisis where fiat hits the tracks and crypto and other things dive up.
I don't know, because the quantum computing industry is quite, I mean, it's $1 billion, trillion dollar industry. You know, most universities are jumping into quantum computing, and I talk about quantum computing because there's a lot of gold in those machines and they can't run without them as far as I know. I could be wrong, but
there's a very limited supply of silver physically in the world, and there's a much greater supply of gold. So even though now gold is way, way more expensive than silver, it's also been surmised that in due course silver would be far more highly sought after than gold. But, you know, that would be undoing thousands of years of conditioning, including our, fancy Egyptians, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but I think you can have two valuable precious metals. You don't, if you hold both, I mean, what harm will it do? I believe that they're still going to be valuable. Perhaps silver will be more valuable, but it doesn't matter if you've got a bit of both,
Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, today. We have had a bit of a lengthy waffle, but I think we've needed it. I'm back at school and it's been intense.
It is. And what is it, like nearly the middle of the year? I mean, maybe not. It's getting on a bit.
It feels like it.
I literally just took down the Christmas tree and the year's nearly finished. Well, on that note, I will see you next week. Enjoy your
I shall see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Crypto Clothesline.